Good afternoon, BookTube. You join me yet again for yet another reading roundup. I have a few books to show you, and I think I'm going to start with Wuthering Heights, which I recently reread. It is my favourite Bronte novel, and one of my favourite Victorian novels of all time. And as we are, of course, marking Victober here on BookTube, I think it's only topical and appropriate that I have a Victorian book, a Victorian novel, here to show you. Now, this is actually my third reading of Wuthering Heights, and it was a very pleasant and enjoyable one, I must say. And I actually managed to finish the book rather more quickly than I was on the previous two occasions, because so much of it is familiar to me now that I didn't feel as much need to linger over certain scenes or certain bits of dialogue. But it is a remarkable book. The Brontes are a remarkable family. What those sisters were able to achieve in terms of their literary accomplishments, despite the very cloistered circumstances of their rather circumscribed, narrow existence out there in the Yorkshire moors, is nothing short of sensational. So I will always hold them in awe. Emily is by far my favourite Bronte sister, largely on the strength of Wuthering Heights and also her poetry. Although she didn't write as much as her sisters, I find that her writing is the writing that most impacts me out of all of the Bronte sisters' works. And Wuthering Heights is the tale of the passionate love affair between Catherine, who is the daughter of a fairly well-to-do, run-of-the-mill local squire named Mr. Earnshaw, and Heathcliff, who is this foundling child who is found on the streets of Liverpool by Mr. Earnshaw, and is brought home and adopted, essentially, and made part of the family. And we follow their relationship. We see how Heathcliff, this wild gypsy of uncertain origins, of wild and volcanic temperament, essentially destroys the whole dynamic of the family. We see him rejected by the people around him. We see its effect on his character. We see him becoming vengeful and cruel in response to this. And as the novel goes on, we follow the incredible transformation of this character from despised foundling child to force of nature. He returns to the community as an adult, having been banished on the death of his protector, Mr. Earnshaw. He returns to the community, and he returns determined to exact revenge. And he is able to do this using all of the very same social institutions that were used against him. So he makes use, in particular, of the traditional relationship between the sexes to dominate the women around him, in particular Isabella Linton, whom he marries. And he uses the laws around property to essentially usurp control of both Wuthering Heights, which is the manor that the book takes its name from, and also Thrushcross Grange, which is, of course, the estate owned by the Lintons. And we see how this incredibly charismatic figure, this villainous figure, destroys both of these families and uses the weaknesses of their respective occupants and the respective dynasts. In the case of Earnshaw, the Earnshaws, he manipulates expertly the partiality of Hindley to alcohol. In the case of the Lintons, he manipulates the rather weak and feeble and effeminate Edgar, and essentially uses the character flaws of these two individuals to bring total and complete destruction to their households. Now, most of the book is narrated by a maidservant called Nellie Dean, who manages to present herself in a very flattering light, as you'd expect, because she is, of course, the one narrating the story. And if you were to believe her narration, she is always the sensible one. She is always the reasonable one against the mad and irrational behavior of those around her, which, of course, should induce in the reader, and I think it's meant to induce, a healthy sense of skepticism towards this narrator who always manages to present herself in the best possible light. Now, Heathcliff, as villainous as he is absolutely captivating. Anybody who reads this will be captivated by him. Generations have found him to be an incredibly compelling, powerfully written figure. And it's quite clear to us now, many decades after it was written, that Emily drew a lot of inspiration for the character from what was going on in her own life, particularly with regards to her alcoholic brother, Branwell. And he definitely had a number of qualities which we can actually identify with the character of Hindley in this novel. So that in particular is really interesting to think about. I've never actually read a biography of the Brontes, although I know that there is a celebrated biography of them by some author I've forgotten, but it's just this massive hardback book, and I do mean to read it one of these days, because I would like to read more about their lives, and there was a recent movie about Emily Bronte's life, which I highly recommend. I really enjoyed it, and although it does take liberties with the historical events of her life, I really appreciate it in terms of its dramatic power, and it draws heavily upon the themes and the story in Wuthering Heights in order to sensationalize her life. Now, there is also a film adaptation of Wuthering Heights coming out soon, and I know that there has been a lot of controversy over the casting choices, which I am not even going to get into, because I think that these kinds of debates are, quite frankly, tiresome. They are, quite frankly, absurd, far too politicized in my opinion, and I really don't like the whole ambience around it. It is quite unpleasant to deal with. So I am not even going to wade into that particular controversy. I just hope that the movie isn't a complete disaster, and that the adaptation is a worthwhile one. I know that there have been other adaptations. There was a recent one that was done many years ago, which I don't think was particularly good, but we'll see what becomes of this one that's currently in the works. It could turn out to be a very good adaptation. It might turn out to be a very bad adaptation. We'll just have to wait and see. I'm not even going to follow any of the controversy on it over the casting or anything like that on social media or elsewhere, because I have better things to do with my time. So that's Wuthering Heights. I really, really enjoyed my third reading of it. I think the way in which it presents Heathcliff, the way in which it provides a subtle critique of Victorian society, as it then was, the way in which it presents religion, particularly in the form of the rather comic fool, Joseph, and his character, the way in which it presents this whole idea of respectability and property and property ownership, and what it means to be respectable in 19th century England, especially in rural 19th century England, is deeply, deeply thought-provoking, and unsurprisingly caused a massive stir at the time among the more prudish of her contemporaries. This is a shocking novel. was a shocking novel to the people who read it at the time. Full of violence, physical violence, as well as psychological violence. You have here, in the way in which the characters are presented, clear hallmarks of what we would nowadays diagnose as borderline personality disorder, especially in the case of Catherine. You have here uh, all sorts of crazy and horrifying occurrences, which are just as shocking now, actually, as they would have been to people at the time. This isn't some innocent love story, as it's often been misconstrued as being. So that is Wuthering Heights. I really enjoyed my third read of it. I am currently reading this history book called Republic by Alice Hunt, who is a professor of early modern history and literature at, I believe it is the University of Liverpool? Or have I gotten that wrong? No, Southampton. The University of Southampton. This is the latest in a series of books that have come out in recent years about this very tumultuous period in English history. And I can't help but think that a lot of what's driving this upsurge in interest in this period is Brexit and recent politics here in this country. The whole conflict between the legislature and the executive, in its intensity and in its intractability, mirrors a lot of what was going on in British history at this time. So it's not that surprising that we are seeing this upsurge in interest. And I was lucky enough to get myself a review copy of this book, which I would like to write a review for Open Letters Review. Steve Donahue has very kindly agreed to allow me to review this book. So I'm currently near the end. I'm more than halfway through. Most of what's in here is not new. If for those of you who are interested in my background, I actually studied this period in great detail at school when I was 17 years old. And during that time, I was doing what is known in this country as my A-levels, which are a qualification that you have to complete in order to go to university. So I picked as one of my A-levels history. And one of the topics that we studied was Britain from 1603 to 1660, which of course is the period of the Tudors and the English Civil War. So the Civil War period was something that we had to study at great length, in great detail. I fell in love with the period. It was a period which had long interested me, but being able to study it like a real historian was just the most fantastic thing in the world. I was deeply absorbed in my studies of this period. I just think it's an incredibly exciting and frankly neglected period in English history, and I'm glad that it's getting a much needed reassessment, because until recently, a lot of what has been written about this period was written about this period was, for the most part, not really being publicized for general consumption. A lot of it was being written and read by academics. A lot of it was in the form of academic monographs by fairly obscure figures who aren't really known outside of the rather cloistered world of academia. Figures such as David Underdown, people like Christopher Hill, although less so in his case, as he was relatively well known in his time. People like E.P. Thompson, etc. They were part of a series of historians who did their best to publicize a lot of the research being done on this period. But I would say that now we are seeing a resurgence that far surpasses what even they were able to do in terms of interest in this period. Now, I am enjoying this book so far. A lot of it isn't new. I know this period well. I continued to study this period after my A-levels when I went to university, and I actually studied a module. I did a module on early modern Britain, and I again got to study this period in depth, and I know this period very well. So a lot of what Alice Hunt is saying here is not new. It's not revelatory in any real way, with some exceptions. I think what she says about the Puritan Enlightenment during this period and the way in which people such as Samuel Hartlib were influencing discussion during this time is actually a very new angle to take. It's not something which I have read too much about previously. So in that sense, this is fairly new in terms of its approach. A lot of it is, however, well-worn ground, ground that was discovered or rediscovered by historians past, such as Christopher Hill, and his books such as The World Turned Upside Down. A lot of what she writes about the religious sectaries and the process by which the protectorate under Oliver Cromwell was put into place is not new to me. There is not much in terms of original research or discoveries in here so far. It's a very readable, very digestible one volume about this period, part of a series that has been published in recent years. Paul Ley wrote a book called Providence Lost, which I actually am planning to read after this because it's been on my shelf for a while now. And I think in order to review this book more effectively, I think I should get a handle on its context. And I think reading Paul Ley's book and comparing it to this one should just give me a bit more context with which to actually achieve that. So this is Paul Ley's book, Providence Lost. I will read that after I'm finished with Alice Hunt's book. But so far, enjoyable, but not groundbreaking. So I think this should actually prompt something of a reassessment on the part of whether or not people like myself as to whether we need yet another book about the 1650s, because I think that the research has been, well, I think the research possibilities have been exploited to their fullest at this moment in time. It's quite possible that we have saturated completely the ground, the field, with all of the knowledge and discovery and research that could possibly be done. Whether we need another book of the 1650s is unclear, but I will leave that to people to decide. I'm not so sure about that myself, and I do hope at some point to get round to reading Michael Katz's new translation of The Brothers Karamazov, my personal favourite Dostoevsky novel. This is a gorgeous hardback edition, which should last for a very long time. Oh, yes, it is. Yes, it actually has. I don't know if you can see this. I will just take the wrapping off, as that makes things a lot easier. I have detected this. So this is actually sewn binding, which I'm just going to... It doesn't come very clearly on my camera here. It's sewn, but the binding is sewn, the spine is sewn in, which just means that the book is going to be even more sturdy as I read it. So this is a book which I expect to take many rereadings. I'm glad I got it in hardcover, because I think that this book is a book that deserves to be read in hardcover. It is one of the greatest novels ever written, one of my personal favourites. I already have the Everyman edition, but that's in the Pavia and Volokhonsky translation, and to be quite honest, I don't much care for their translation. I've not read their translation in full. I've read bits of it. I have read critique of it from Gary Saul Mawson and others who say that it's clunky at best. So I may read it in full just to get a sense of it, but really it's not a priority for me. I'd much rather get to the Michael Katz translation, because I've heard only good things about it. So that is the Michael Katz translation of the Brothers Karamazov, which I hope to read soon. When exactly I'll get to it is unclear. So that is my reading roundup for this week. We have Wuthering Heights in this gorgeous Penguin English Library edition. This is a series of Penguin classics that Penguin started some years ago. The cover design is by this cover artist called Coralie Bickford Smith. I have a few more of these. I have a couple of E.M. Forster's novels on my shelf, which are also in this edition, and I also have a copy of Moby Dick in this edition. So I have quite a few of these, and I just think they look absolutely gorgeous. It's no different from a normal Penguin classic. I mean, the page quality is not much different in terms of the paper that's used, but it just looks nice on your shelf. So Wuthering Heights, we have Alice Hunt, we have Providence Lost, which I've not read yet, but I want to read it soon, and we have the Michael Katz translation of the Brothers Karamazov, which, as I've said before, I've not had the chance to read yet. So, 2 of these I've read, 2 of them I haven't read yet. I hope to get to those books soon, and I hope to catch up with all of you soon. If you have been reading similar books, feel free to comment in the comment section below. If you have some other books which you think I should get to, again, feel free to comment in the comment section below. I did not bring it up here, I left it downstairs, but I recently purchased from Foyles, which is this well-known bookstore in the United Kingdom, a Penguin Classic copy of Cardinal Newman's Apologia Pro Vita Sua, which I also want to read at some point, and I may get round to reading that for Victober. Cardinal Newman, for those of you who don't know him, was this celebrated Anglican priest back in the Victorian period who caused when he decided to convert to Catholicism, and his autobiography, his Apologia Pro Vita Sua, is an attempt to justify his decision to convert to Catholicism and to answer the attacks that were made on him by those who accused him of being a heretic. And on having recently read Dermot McCulloch's fantastic History of Christianity, I think it's only fitting that I read a work like that, just to give myself some added context as to the different ways in which people have interpreted Christianity. And as someone who, like Newman, comes from a Protestant background, an evangelical background, and is now questioning a lot of the assumptions I held about other forms of Christianity, like Catholicism, he's actually someone I really want to read and find out more about. So that is all I have to say, and I hope to catch up with all of you again soon. Bye for now, BookTube.